Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And here's one you've all been waiting for, the self-titled debut album from Harry Styles. You know, I think it's worth mentioning how we got here. I also think it's worth mentioning that there's no real way to discuss this debut project without placing it in context of the other One Direction debut projects that have been released or are launching as we speak. Because when I reviewed Mind of Mine by Zayn back last year in 2016, I made the comment that it was kind of hard to ignore how much history was just repeating itself. A boy band breakaway making a sleek, sexy R&B project that was already eclipsing the band in terms of success. It got a #1 in the United States. But this is where things get, well, a little more complicated, because while Zayn may have gotten that #1, the critics were not exactly kind to him. That album has not aged well, and he spent the rest of 2016 and really 2017 with steadily diminishing returns. He's working with Party Next Door now, for God's sakes. But the larger surprise is that unlike previous boy band projects, the other members were splitting off into wildly different directions. Louis split towards modern pop, a direction that seems to be echoed by Liam, given his upcoming single release in a week or so with a feature from Quavo of all people, which is kind of fascinating given that for as much as these two were the main songwriters in One Direction, the one who pivoted towards the acoustic folk stereotype was Niall Horan, who has been making music I'd argue is way better than it's been given credit. And then there's Harry Styles, who many people thought would be the breakout star as the face of the band, and easily its most popular and recognizable member, even though, unlike Justin Timberlake, if we want to make that parallel, he wasn't one of the bigger contributing songwriters in One Direction. So I think everyone was pretty much blindsided when he released Sign of the Times, which was a direct callback to 70s classic rock, which nobody saw coming. And also, that was really good. Now, granted, if you look behind the scenes, it's not all that surprising. Styles had pulled on Jeff Basker, along with Tyler Johnson, who was the main producer behind that criminally underrated pop country debut from Cam called Untamed back in 2015. This was a team of producers and writers who knew exactly how to put together a strong album. He had veterans on board, so even if it would feel like a shameless throwback, there would be real quality to it. Still, while he might have won over some of the critics who weren't poptimists and who have been desperately looking for reasons to praise something connected to One Direction, I was a lot more skeptical. Because if you were going to go for that brand of rock music, eventually the edge would have to materialize, and I hadn't really heard it yet. So, okay, what did this self-titled record deliver? What did we get from Harry Styles? Well, this, I predict, will be a divisive review. In fact, I think a lot of reviews of this album will end up being pretty divisive. And I'm talking about the critical press here, not the fans. Most of them will have grown up with One Direction and will be completely comfortable with the shift towards a different, more mature sound out of Harry Styles, even if it's one that only sounds vaguely familiar to them. Whereas with critics who know, I foresee the divide coming among those who are enraptured by the fact that Harry Styles is embracing a more critic-friendly sound instead of his boy band roots, or indeed anything that's making an obvious play for mainstream attention or the radio, versus the rock purists who know exactly what Harry's pulling from and will judge him that much more harshly against it. Now for me, I'm somewhere in between, and while I will not say that he completely did this sound justice, because he didn't, there's enough solid craftsmanship here to acknowledge a pretty impressive debut effort, and I think I can agree with the majority of critics by saying this is easily the best full project of anything associated with One Direction. It is a good album. So okay, what does this mean for it? Well, we have to start off with the sound and the production, and by far the most fascinating part of this album, at least from a critical standpoint if you know the history, because the more listens I gave it, this is not really a pop record, at least not purely, at least much closer to rock, specifically the mainly softer strains that ran through much of the 70s. And if you know the genre as well as I do, you'll spot a lot of the parallels immediately. Hell, it might not be as actively progressive in its approach, but the tones and the vocal layering and the guitar work on Meet Me in the Hallway, it recalls some early Pink Floyd, and everybody and their mother has already pointed out that Bowie and the Queen comparisons in Sign of the Times, but it actually goes deeper than that. Carolina sounds like something that Wings or George Harrison would have cut. Two Ghosts is approaching the touches of the Bakersfield sound and country, and maybe a little bit of the soft rock side of Chicago. Ever Since New York is a cut where you can easily hear the Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, and maybe a little bit of very early U2, and Woman is about as close of a Benny and the Jets parallel as you can get without actively ripping off Elton John. What will startle most people are his stabs at a more swaggering classic rock sound like the Rolling Stones on Only Only Angel, or the touches of punk that managed to creep into Kiwi, which come as a bit of a jolt after Sweet Creature, which yes remains the worst song here, if only because it doesn't really have that same unique 70s flavor and identity. Besides the writing issues I already talked about in Billboard Breakdown, it's just not an acoustic song that does a lot for me. And you know, credit must be given where it's due. Jeff Basker and crew, they make it sound good. It's got nowhere near the bite or raw toughness or complexity of those older acts, but there is an art to making this feel cohesive given how many styles it's touching. And there's a better flow to this album than there's any right to be. And on a compositional level, these are good tracks, and it's very telling how the producers avoided any obvious gimmicks associated with the 70s besides aping the sounds of 40 years ago. Okay, maybe with the piano and squonking of Woman, but beyond that, solid warm acoustic textures, some firm bass lines, some prominent melodies, some good electric guitar, some better hooks, and if you like this sound, this is a well-produced modern version of it. I'll admit that Sign of the Times grew on me a fair bit and earned its dramatic swell a little better, even if it is screaming out for a real meaty guitar solo for the outro, and between the soft acoustic crooning on Two Ghosts and the balance of richer electric tones that come on Ever Since New York with a killer multi-tracked hook, if that song is a single instead of Sweet Creature, it would be a monster. I really liked it. But where things get more complicated are the more rock-driven songs. Mostly because for as much of Only Angel feels like a cut from Sticky Fingers, Harry Styles is not Mick Jagger. He's got charisma, don't get me wrong, he's got the pipes, he's got real range, especially as a dramatic performer. I can see him sticking around, especially if this is the sort of music that he wants to make that feels a little bit more timeless, for lack of a better word. But also rock in this vein in the 70s was lean and nasty, had a real bite to it. Sure, give him years of cigarettes, whiskey, and cocaine abuse, and Harry Styles might sound a little closer to it, but you're not gonna fool me with a live vocal pickup that Harry Styles is entirely convincing for this brand of rock. Ron Gallo and Kyle Kraft, they've got nothing to worry about here. Of course, the larger factor of this comes in the writing, which, if you don't remember those 70s albums, tended to be where singer-songwriters really distinguished themselves and shone. And let's be real, despite a valiant effort, Harry Styles, he's just not in that territory yet as a songwriter. And most of this because I have a hard time getting a handle on who he really is as an artist and a performer. Because let's make this abundantly clear, a sort of stylistic shift in today's day and age, this is a risk. Instead of chasing trap or tropical sounds, Harry Styles is following in the mold of a slightly more accessible Foxygen, for lack of better comparison. And you don't see that from boy bands, that's worth noting on. But what he's trying to say with this record, or who he really is as an artist, that's not really clear. It's almost a little distant. You'd think that's because the album is bookended by breakup songs that don't shy away from good framing in the details, and I gotta give points to Harry Styles for at least showing the lingering aftermath of a breakup, and that is not pleasant. From an opening verse where he wakes up alone, jerks off, goes back to sleep, and then gets plowed, it does not exactly paint him in a good light. I can respect him for that, but it's also not really the case where he would say this album is more of a breakup record. If I'm gonna criticize anything about this album that's all that concrete, is that the writing is kind of all over the place. It can definitely skid towards cliche on the more rock tracks. And for as cohesive as the sound might feel, the content is not. We get New Love and Plenty of Sex on Carolina, or Only Angel and Kiwi, even if in the last case that sort of thing can be a really bad idea. We get fracturing relationships on Woman and Sweet Creature that are barely being held together. And then we get the aftermath on Two Ghosts and Ever Since New York. And I think it's telling why the last two songs connect with me the most, besides being just the best composed. Because while they feel grounded in something real that fell away and they're handled with some real maturity, and if it's true they were inspired by Harry Styles' relationship with Taylor Swift, well, you know what? It's a glimpse of Harry Styles' humanity and it feels like something real, and I can definitely respect that. But as a whole, yeah, you know what? I like this. I don't love it. In terms of 70s rock, I think that Harry Styles compromises his lyrical themes and ideas by taking a tour of the genre, but he's also tapping into an older sound and surrounding himself with a good enough team to create a convincingly version of this sound, even if I'd argue that he never really surpasses those greats. As such, for me, I think this is a good 7 out of 10. That's appropriate. I'm gonna recommend this. I don't know if this will sell to One Direction fans or will serve as a good entry point to this sort of rock music, but you know what? There's a part of me that really hopes it does. And if I want to endorse this album, that's really all the reason I need. So yeah, check this out. It's worth it. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe. I'd be more than grateful. I got the poll up here. I'm really curious where Harry Styles and One Direction fans will fall on this album, so there's the poll for you all to tell me. And I got the link in the description below if you want to buy the album. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to get more involved in my scheduling process, link to my Patreon is right there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on the albums coming up, and once a week you guys get to add records to the schedule if you're in the higher tiers. More details right there, but until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.